simply because my professional experience has been as a journalist for almost 30 years now. And I've spent a tremendous amount of time watching the criminal justice system, going to court, riding with police officers, riding with immigration officers, talking to people in prisons, watching the relationship of power between law enforcement and the courts and those of us who don't have those powers. Because criminal justice is the place where, more often than not, the power of the government is really going to intersect with the lives of people in the ways that can be so outrageously disproportionate to what justice would seem to call for. And you've heard a lot of examples from some of these other folks, and they are outrageous, about truly horrendous people or decisions or situations that led to results that we can all pretty much look at and say, well, that's unacceptable. That should never have happened. And so what I wanted to talk about a little bit is the small things that you should pay attention to, because they're the ones that lead to the big things. Years back, when I was a reporter for the Dallas Times-Herald, a newspaper that no longer exists, writing with police officers up in Dallas. And I think we were working on a package of stories about drugs at the time. I don't recall. And we're riding at night in South Dallas, two white officers, I'm in the back of the car. And we pull into a car wash, and there's a car parked over to the side, and there's three African-American guys in this car sitting over there. I have no idea what they're doing. These police officers certainly have no idea what they're doing. But the next thing I know, I'm just sitting in the back. The lights are on. They're barging out of the car. They're over to that car. They pull those three kids out. They've got them down on the ground, and they're screaming at them, telling them to hold still. They search them. They throw the car. They don't find anything. They say, "Okay, go on about your business." And they come back to the car, and I say, "Well, what was that all about?" I was still a young enough reporter that I believed that police officers acted on probable cause. And they kind of looked at me, and they kind of looked at each other, and they said, "Well, didn't you see the furtive gesture?" And I said, "Excuse me?" And they said, "The furtive gesture." One of them, when he saw us pull into the parking lot, took his hand, which had been up near his head, and put it down in front of the seat. He could have been hiding drugs. Now, that roust would not have happened in any other, not in any other neighborhood, but certainly not in Highland Park or any predominantly white neighborhood. And it would not have happened to three white kids sitting in a car at a Burger King in North Dallas. But it did happen there, and it happened to those kids. Now, you can argue, and this is the point I want to get to, and I apologize for being wrong, because people jump these things off of assumptions. And just because people make assumptions doesn't mean that they're bad people. The problem is bad assumptions. These police officers in Dallas certainly would not consider themselves racists. If you met them, if you talked to them, you probably would not think they were racist. Racism, so much of it, and so much of the insidious parts of it, is not so overt and so appalling and so egregious that we all can pretty much look at it and say, yes, that's terrible. Assumptions and stereotypes and these things ripple out through very good people in very bad ways because they are making bad assumptions, because they don't know, because they haven't been exposed to things. We still live in a country where most people live with people like themselves. And people, by nature, fear, are distrustful of, or at least wary of people who are not like them. That's not evil. I mean, you can argue that there's a certain amount of, rational self-interest in being wary of things that you're not familiar with. But it's those instincts, those bad assumptions that allows people to dismiss so many of these little things that happen and say, well, it's really not that bad. There's a few bad apples on this police department, and maybe somebody, you know, the police officer came to see you. That's a horrible story. I think we're all going to agree with that. But really, that must have been a bad apple. You know, this fellow, this Reverend Smith, he got stopped at a traffic stop. He had to sit in his car for 30 minutes. Is that really all that horrible? I mean, come on. The guy lost 30 minutes of time, but it was as part of an effort to keep all the rest of us safe, to enforce the laws of the country. Is that really all that bad? What I hope you all understand, and why I am truly encouraged to see so many people, is to understand why that really is that bad. Because it's those increments, it is that ability to make things that truly are offensive palatable. And then it is the second step. It's the people, it's the willingness of people of good intentions and reason to accept a seemingly palatable explanation for something that should not have happened that allows it to continue. Now, I grew up, you know, 60s, 70s, when the notion that card-carrying member of the ACLU would ever again be it was a joke, that it would ever again be considered a damnation, an implication that you were a bad American, that you were somehow a threat. It's astounding to me that we've actually returned to a point where affiliation with a group that is dedicated to the pursuit of civil liberties is something that can cause you to be suspect. It's a sad day. But the only way to push that pendulum back, because we do tend to run back and forth between these cycles, is to understand that the worst behaviors, the things that might scare you the most, the things that you see people getting the most outraged about, those are the end of the spectrum. Those are the far end of the continuum. Those are the most extreme examples of things that happen. I can look around this audience and I can assure you that there are people in this audience who know far more about racial profiling personally than I will ever know. I did actually get profiled once crossing the border, but it was because they thought I was a drug dealer. It had nothing to do with race. I was much younger. And I don't hold it against them. If I had seen me at that time, I probably would have reached the same conclusion. But these things are very corrosive. These things are they're very harmful. A lot of this Pew research that's been coming out over the past 2 years really shouldn't scare you if you live in this country, because it's detailing just how much further apart so many of us are moving, politically, economically, and in terms of our perceptions of the world. If you are not exposed to people you do not know, who do things that you do not know, who are from countries that you have not been to, who are from a different economic class than you do, you understand them less. These problems only continue